Somewhere around 12,000 years ago, someone came up with this brilliant idea to go ahead and domesticate sheep. And what was amazing about it is that the sheep seemed to be willing to go along with the program, because when you get right down to it, sheep are pretty bright creatures. And while they are unaware they could wind up in certain cultures and countries as food on the table, which might have changed their mind about the whole arrangement, their high intelligence, and they are very intelligent, led them to appreciate and employ this flocking mentality and lifestyle. And that led to their survival as a species. And all was well with the world when it came to sheep under the care of a shepherd. Knowing that a shepherd was in their midst, not as their boss, but rather to serve them as staff, to keep them safe and fed, the relationship between humanity and sheep grew. Now, just as an aside, if you're wondering, the earliest animals that were brought into a domesticated relationship with us, of course, were dogs. And not related at all to the gospel, but fascinating food for thought, especially in these times, there are many anthropologists who believe that it was the humans who received the socialization skills from the dogs rather than the other way around. Now, dog lovers certainly would easily believe that. But as I say, that was a little aside. Sheep as a flock under the care of a shepherd goes way, way back. Again, around 12,000 years. Now, if you think about it, this practice probably grew in a way that we could understand. It became pretty clear that some of the shepherds were a little bit better than other shepherds. If sheep are bred to appreciate the care of a shepherd, it is absolutely true that somewhere within the relationship there is this trust element that not only makes itself known, but begins to grow on the sheep. Yet sadly, if there is a nefarious bandit or thief among the sheep, things can go amok pretty quickly. And Jesus knew that. And for that matter, so did the sheep back then, and so do sheep today know the same. Again, they are not dim-witted. Now, we're pretty used to sermons about Jesus as the Good Shepherd on this, the fourth Sunday of Easter. This is the way it always is. And normally we think about the Good Shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep and will always chase after the one out of 100 that wanders off, even though it's really foolish to do that, to pursue them. After all, with the way the world works, it is far better to cut your losses. Watch out for the other 99 in the club, and if you lose one, well, that's just the breaks of tending sheep. But in the face of the world's wisdom about this, there stands the foolishness of God, in which the Good Shepherd is wired not to lose one, and as a result will always, always, always go after the wayward sheep. In this morning's gospel, we actually heard something else going on. Jesus is not self-identifying in this particular reading as the shepherd, but rather is identifying himself as the gate for the sheep. At night, when the sheep were brought into town for reasons of safety, the shepherd would entrust the gatekeeper with them, leaving them in his safe space behind the gate. And then, presumably, when the sheep would bed down for the night, he would go home, have dinner, catch the news on TV, and hit the sack. And then in the morning, the shepherd would reappear at the sheep gate, probably show his credentials, and then he or she would call out his sheep for the day of grazing. Again, with sheep being fairly bright, they would recognize the shepherd's voice, and knowing who they belonged to would follow the shepherd out from the safety in the city and into the surrounding area for the day. So, in a curious kind of way, in your mind's eye, you can imagine Jesus, a gatekeeper, checking off those who would come for the sheep each day. Good guy, good guy, good guy. Bad, nefarious bandit. No, go away. Good guy, good guy, good guy. Here are your sheep. But how would he know? How would he know? Well, the key to the whole thing seems to be that the legitimate shepherds, the ones who care for and protect the sheep, are in the business of providing abundant life, which, when it comes to people, has its foundation in the forgiveness of sins, acceptance of those who are outsiders, and love. In short, the shepherds Jesus would let in would be dedicated to have a flock where all were welcome to return, despite the fact that they might have caused problems or wandered away. The sheep knew that when push came to shove, the shepherd who left with the endorsement of Jesus was willing to lay down his life for the sheep under his care. Now, if the sheep know the voice of Jesus, the gatekeeper, it is to him that they will flock into town for sanctuary when the day is done, and then in the morning he will be the same for liberating the sheep back into the world. After all, he is the gate by which we enter a state of grace and salvation, and he is the gate through which they and through which we engage in ministry. As our presiding Bishop Michael Curry often puts it in so many words, to change the world from the nightmare it can often be into the dream that God imagines for all. I find that twist kind of fascinating about Jesus being the gate. In Easter, we see a vision of a resurrected Christ, and at the same time, we are reminded, again, by Paul's letter to the Ephesians, that we now function as this risen Lord in the midst of a world that is filled with brokenness. We are not just those called to reflect him in his earthly ministry, from where we get this particular story, but we are also to mirror his image as the one who rose from the dead. And quite frankly, if you follow this line of reasoning, we can't help but begin to think that besides being the one who cares for the sheep in the name of Christ, we similarly have been called to be a gatekeeper as well, bringing the weary into a safe place for rest, and then turning the people of God out into the world to bring good news to those who find themselves in captivity or in want or in despair. Well, sometimes the mere idea of such a thing is really kind of pleasing to the heart when you think about it, that we could possibly be such a gate. Not to keep out, but rather to be the means of opening up and letting in is nothing short of inspiring, at least to me. But such a notion is really more than just an abstract idea. It is who we are. It is who we have been all along. Illustrative of Jesus acting through us in being a gate to sanctuary in our own time and place. Let me share with you a story about a man who has spoken publicly of what happened to him that asserts the truth behind such a belief. One day, many years ago, this fellow was at a point in which he was seriously thinking about ending his life. Desperation and despondency were beating him literally to death. As he was wandering down the streets, getting closer and closer to giving up, he chanced upon a now retired Episcopal priest I happen to know quite well, and they struck up a conversation. Well, one thing led to another, but directly because of that initial encounter, today there exists an extraordinary ministry to orphans in sub-Saharan Africa, which has as its founder, you guessed it, the man who wanted to take his life and end it all that particular day. This priest and this parish became a gate which allowed him in for needed rest and refreshment, and then helped him go out to change the world, which he did, providing a network of homes and family environments for children who had lost their parents to famine and warfare and all other means of violence. That's what it can mean to be Christ-like as a gatekeeper in our times and in our world. You never know when you're going to end up being Christ to someone, which in turn will enable that person to be the risen Lord among the lost and the harassed. Tending sheep can be funny business. There are ups and downs to it, and yes, occasionally one does take off to gallivant in dangerous places. But we've become equipped to offer sanctuary to those beleaguered, helping them find their way back. In short, as Easter people, we are here, dear friends, so that everyone can have life and have it abundantly. What a privilege to actually be in the business of giving joy the means to conquer despair. Something fairly easily done, though, when we remember that the tomb is empty and that Christ is risen. Amen.